Welcome to Taiwan versus the world. We are going to Latin America today. First to discuss the visit of a delegation from Panama to Taiwan, and then to talk about the results of the presidential elections in Honduras, which have strong implications for Taiwan as well. The region has been a sensitive one for Taiwan, as it includes several of Taiwan's diplomatic allies, and others like Honduras and Panama that were allies until recently. Let's explore what is changing in the region. A 9-member cross-party delegation from Panama's National Assembly has visited Taiwan. To comment on this, we are talking today with Matt, Youkee, and Patrick Ko. Matt and Patrick, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I would ask you both, please, to introduce yourself. Matt, can you tell us more about yourself?
So I'm a British journalist, freelance journalist, usually based in Panama. I write for The Economist and The Guardian and other publications. But over the last few months, I've been in Taiwan, and so I was here at the happy coincidence that I was here when the Panamanian delegation came for the first time in, pretty much 10 years.
That's indeed a lucky call. And you, Patrick, can you tell us about yourself?
Yes, so I am a policy analyst at Safe Spaces, a media consulting company based in Washington, D.C., in the US, and also Taipei, Taiwan. And I am their policy analyst for Latin America, East Asia relations.
Wonderful, thanks. So, first of all, if we can talk about the visit itself, if you can both tell me what exactly happened, who came, and why, and what did they do?
So the visit was they were members of Panama's National Assembly. Panama is unicameral, only has one, it doesn't have a Senate and a House. It just has one parliament. And it was several members, mainly of opposition parties, quite a few younger members. They came here, they met with the vice president, they met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and they, talked about maintaining sort of ties between the two parliaments, about potentials for investment, particularly in the semiconductors industry, which Panama wants to become a part of as supply chains sort of shift towards the Americas. And yeah, I think they were here for 4 days, but it was informal and it was not sanctioned or basically supported by the president of Panama.
Right, and if I may add, the delegation was led by Manuel Cohen and Roland Amef de Gracia, who are both co-chairs for Panama in the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, IPAC, which is an alliance of parliamentary members from all across the world that are skeptical about China. And also, the trip was funded by Taiwan. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has stated that the visit was intended to deepen understanding and also explore mutually beneficial cooperation, as Matt told.
So, one of the visitors you said is a member of IPAC. This is the same organization that welcomed Xiaobi Kim in Brussels.
Yes.
So there are several interesting things in what you are both telling me. One of them is that I read that also elsewhere. This is the legislative power in Panama that is doing this visit, but not the executive. And there seems to be a certain level of disagreement between the executive and legislative branch in Panama about this trip. Am I correct?
It certainly is. Essentially, this didn't have the support of the president. The president of Panama at the moment has a very, very tough job. Since he came to power about 18 months ago, he had to deal with a major migration crisis through the Darien Gap, the border between Panama and Colombia. And then when Donald Trump came to power, he had the world's major superpower threatening to take back the Panama Canal because it was quote unquote run by Chinese soldiers, according to Donald Trump, which is not strictly true. But there has been growing Chinese influence in Panama since 2017. And then there was a succession of visits by Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth to Panama. And the pressure was such that the Panamanian government gave a lot of concessions to the US it agreed to withdraw from or to not renew its membership of China's Belt and Road Infrastructure Building Initiative. It agreed to accept much more, a greater quantity of US troops on its soil. It joined IPAC, as we mentioned, and it also has agreed. Well, it's has decided to launch a legal case against two Chinese owned ports at either end of the Panama Canal. These are the ports that Donald Trump is ultimately concerned about, and there is a legal case currently ongoing, which could declare those two ports unconstitutional and lead to the contract the Chinese have on those ports being withdrawn. So this is the context on which this visit has taken place. And so while Molino has sort of given many concessions, the US have, or Donald Trump and the State Department have essentially forced Panama into choosing one side of the other, the US over China, but still there's a lot of Chinese investment, a lot of sort of latent Chinese interests in Panama, and this trip to Taiwan could be, just further aggravating an already very tense situation in the country.
And then, if I may ask, Patrick, maybe you know this. You just mentioned that the trip was actually even paid for by Taiwan, you said. So, who exactly is at the origin of this? Is this Taiwan that made this trip happen?
So from my understanding, yes, the trip was planned by Taiwan, and they invited these members of parliament from Panama. And as Matt said, they're mostly from the opposition. And I think this trip also demonstrates that there is willingness within Panama's legislative to engage with Taiwan, even though both countries broke ties in 2017. And this parliamentary exchange shows that there is pragmatism and there is a chance for Panama and Taiwan to engage through issue-based engagement, as Panamanian parliamentaries are willing to get exposure from Taiwan on its technology, smart logistics, shipping experience, and also exploring investment and operational models rather than diplomatic switch. Because as Matt said, there wasn't a presidential approval for this trip.
And so, if we can play devil's advocate for a second, or at least challenge this, is it really something that comes from a grassroots desire in Panama, or is this Taiwan kind of making it happen? Because, for example, like we remember, on one hand, Xiaobi Kim entering the European Parliament building, visiting Brussels is a good thing. On the other hand, well, this was a rented space, so it's not exactly the same as speaking to the Parliament. So I have a bit of echoes of this here. Is this really a significant event to have this Panamanian delegation, or are we kind of manufacturing something that looks bigger than what it really is?
I think it's definitely a win for Taiwan. The optics are good for Taiwan. The optics are good for the US as well. The US wants Panama to be more stringently anti-Chinese, and so anything that looks like Panama is, confronting or I get confronting the Chinese is positive from the US perspective. From a Panamanian's perspective, it's true that they do want to be part of the semiconductor sort of supply chain. That may seem ambitious. It should be noted that Costa Rica, Panama's neighbor to the north and west, has a Intel manufacturing facility. Panama thinks that due to its strategic location, it could be, form some sort of part in the supply chain or distribution of the semiconductor industry in the future. So there is definite benefits for Panama. There is potential benefits for Panama. But I do think that on the sort of risk reward here, there was a much bigger risk regarding China's potential reaction to Panamanian diplomacy in the future. So we can go into that separately, or I can go into that straight away. But there are reasons why Panama does not want to antagonize China right now.
Matt is correct. There is a lot of reasons why not to anger China. But I think that also the fact that there is pluralism in Panamanian politics is also a good sign because Panama is in a very difficult position in terms of pleasing the US, but also pleasing China because China is a major trading partner and also user of the Panamanian Canal. So uh, I think that in a way, legislative trip to Taiwan is a positive thing to balance the current position of Panama in the China-US conflict.
That's interesting. And I want to say something. I understand that Panama is, of course, infinitely smaller than both the US and China, but it has quite a massive asset. Because, for example, even if China and the US are big users of the Panama Canal, it's not exactly as if there is any alternative. I mean, they're not exactly going to go through the Cape down the Americas just because they made Panama upset, right?
Well, that's true, but there are, increasingly there are rail options in Mexico. I mean, the plan to build something through Nicaragua never took shape. I mean, Colombia occasionally talks about building alternative. Yeah, none of these things are attractive alternatives to the Panama Canal right now. Mexico could be, but the threat here from Panama's perspective regarding China is that since Donald Trump has come to power and he's threatened the Panama Canal with taking it back, saying that these Chinese run the Panama Canal, which is not true, but the Chinese or Hong Kong firm Hutchison Whampoa runs two ports at either end of the canal. In his State of the Union speech in March, Donald Trump announced that those ports would be purchased in a mega deal by BlackRock and MSC, the Mediterranean shipping company. And Xi Jinping essentially blocked the deal. He said whether he couldn't do it, that China would not allow it for competition reasons and would only allow the deal to go ahead if COSCO, a genuinely state-owned Chinese shipping company, was included in part of the deal. Now, there's been no progress on that. This deal was announced in March. Almost getting on for nine months later, nothing's happened. Um, the Panamanians, for their part, have launched through their fiscal their sort of the DA has launched a case saying that these two Chinese ports are in breach of contract and are perhaps unconstitutional. There's clearly pressure on that side to try and take those contracts away from China. If a deal can't be struck with BlackRock, there is pressure, probably coming from the US, for the Panamanians to remove the contracts for those two ports. If that happens, China is going to launch a massive state investor dispute against Panama, which could be, ruinous for the Panamanian economy. So China does have a big lever here regarding those ports. There's another big lever. Many of the Panamanian political elites and the business elite between 2017 and 2022, 23 were heavily involved with deals with the Chinese. There's a lot of Panamanian elites who have no interest, who have their interests aligned with Chinese interests and whose would find themselves damaged both politically and financially if China was to lose influence and privilege in Panama. So there's another area there where the Panamanian government has to be aware that it can't take actions too damaging to China's interests in Panama.
Well, thanks for all these details. That's very, very interesting. What does Taiwan gain out of this visit and out of this context in general? Because indeed, receiving this delegation is good for signaling and for optics, but in more concrete terms, I mean, okay, another country here hopes to get semiconductors from Taiwan once more, but what else does Taiwan get out of this outside from pure signaling?
For Taiwan, there are several benefits that are both strategic and practical. The first one is that there's visibility and international goodwill. So receiving lawmakers from an international regional hub such as Panama signals that Taiwan's ability to host exchanges goes beyond its formal diplomatic allies that are only 12. And also, there's it's an expansion of economic and technological ties, as Taiwan can showcase its strengths such as semiconductors, AI, smart logistics, and also cultivate business links that could translate into private sector cooperation investments or also knowledge transfer beneficial to both sides, which does not encompass a formal recognition of Taiwan by Panama, but can also be conducted through informal channels. And lastly, there's also soft power and democratic networking, as engaging legislators also strengthen parliamentary ties between both countries and build sympathy for Taiwan's political model and can, as I said before, can expand informal diplomatic networks such as IPAC ties, parliamentary friendships that matter in many multilateral fora across the world.
Do we know a bit more about what they have done? I believe they arrived on the 25th of November and remained 5 days. I know that they met with Vice President Xiao Bi-kim and Foreign Minister Lin Chia-lung. I think they also were supposed to meet Han Guoyu, the Speaker of the Legislative Yuan. Do we know more about what happened during this visit?
No, I mean I think those were the people they were most excited to see, the most important events. I understand they went and visited some of the commercial properties of some of the chip making companies, and some did some more sort of private sector visits. But I think that those were the main focal points. I'm not sure the content of the meetings is as interesting as the fact that they took place, put it that way.
So once more, yes, the details are not the point here. It's just the visit itself that matters. Now, there are other things happening in the region, in Latin America and the Caribbean. We heard about potential changes of parties in power, both in Honduras and in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. St. Vincent being a diplomatic ally, Honduras was a diplomatic ally until recently and switched, and now could switch back. What is the place of Panama in all these in all these changes going in the region? Is Panama going the same way as these countries, or does it remain stable?
Yeah, if I could take this one on, I think there's a really big distinction probably that needs to be made here when we look at when we look at Taiwan's relations in Latin America and the Caribbean. That I would say Panama is by far the most significant country because of its canal, but also potentially because of its financial sector and some of the other sort of logistical capability in that country. I don't think you can compare it with Honduras. I don't think the stakes are as high. The stake, as we've already mentioned, China and the US, the two biggest users of the canal. It is the supposed Chinese influence over the canal, which has led Donald Trump to, threaten to take back the canal and, has sent more troops into Panama. I don't think the US is going to be sending troops to, other countries which recognize China ahead of Taiwan. This is the major issue. This is why Panama, in my perspective, is the most interesting. If Honduras flips back because it feels like it didn't receive the benefits of Chinese recognition that it felt due, I don't think there's that much leverage that the Chinese government would have over Honduras. There's a lot more leverage over Panama. There's a lot more money being invested. There's a lot more at stake regarding the canal. Some of the investments that the Chinese have made, for example, in Huawei has a major distribution office in Panama. Hikvision and some of the security companies, China, some of the financial institutions, some of the Chinese banks have got a major presence in Panama as well. So I think that the stakes are a lot higher. I don't think, and that's why I would say that Panama would be, the one which would be of the number one priority to Beijing compared to the others.
So from my understanding, this is the first trip of Panamanian legislators to Taiwan since the breakup of diplomatic ties between Taiwan and Panama. And this is not a formal diplomatic switch, and it did not have executive sanction. And I could compare this case to Honduras case in 2023, which the diplomatic switch was basically driven by a strong executive decision and also promises by China of infrastructure and and finance. So I don't think that Panama will change its one China stance, its one China principle stance, in the near future, but this is a beginning of interparliamentary exchange between Taiwan and Panama, and perhaps the start of a development of informal ties between both.
So something interesting, since we are touching on Honduras, I was looking a bit into it, and it seems like when the incumbent, still incumbent for a little bit, president of Honduras switched to China, it was not really something that the population of Honduras was caring about. So it was not a debate. It was not there was no demand among the Honduran population for it. Whereas now, when we see that the two pro-Taiwan candidates accumulate 80% of the votes between them, there seems to be more of like a popular will to go back to Taiwan. So that inspires me to ask you both, if you witnessed this in Panama, what is the feeling of the population towards China and Taiwan? Because we're talking about politicians and businessmen, that's one thing. But what about the population?
Panama switched from Taiwan to Beijing in June 2017. On the morning that happened, the former US ambassador insists that he knew nothing about this, that all these negotiations were taken totally in secret. And, the US intelligence services weren't aware that Panama, under the presidency of Juan Carlos Varela, were about to make this switch. It happened. I don't think many people in Panama really cared. When the elections covered the Panamanian elections in 2019, they had a series of debates, televised debates with all the candidates. I don't think the China relationship was mentioned. I maybe one question over the course of three debates, and not a very, not a particularly controversial one. I don't think Panamanian people really understood, the dynamic. There certainly wasn't a clamor. Panama doesn't have, for example, a significant cattle industry, which might benefit from exports. That's been the case in somewhere like Paraguay. In South America, I know the cattle ranchers are, interested in recognizing China because it would be a good market for them. So it's not that there was a clamor for recognition, and I don't think Panamanian people, since then have understood the significance of the decision which was made in 2017 until Donald Trump started talking about it. When Donald Trump started threatening about taking the canal back, which is obviously a very important part of Panamanian revenue, as well as being an important part of the national psyche, Panamanian people suddenly realized, hey, why did we make that decision and allow, the Chinese such influence that we've now alienated our number one ally and protector, being the US. So now I would say that there is more of an anti-China feeling in Panama. That's not to say that I think we're going to see a switch back. It's rather unfortunate. Panama's neighbors, for example, Costa Rica received a football stadium as part of the switch with China. China built a football stadium in El Salvador. They built a library. Panama didn't really see any of those benefits. There was a lot of contracts drawn up and contracts signed, sorry, for investment for infrastructure projects, very few of which have been built. So I don't think there's a great sort of support for Chinese industry and companies in Panama at the moment. They feel like the government of Juan Carlos Varela changed allegiances, didn't bring any benefits, and only brought on this, geopolitical storm that was totally unnecessary.
Yes, I totally agree. In terms of Honduras and Panama, contrasting both, there's a clear difference in terms of the way that Honduras is going right now in terms of recognizing Taiwan and Panama in terms of a potential recognition switch. So Panama's recent delegation was made of legislators and not sponsored by the executive branch. I don't think that in the near future there will be a formal diplomatic switch to Taiwan, especially as Matt told you, there is a lot of Chinese interests and investments in Panama. So I think the stakes are very low, but it is a positive thing for Taiwan that they are able to attract legislators from countries that do not have formal diplomatic ties with them to visit Taiwan, especially due to a significant strong reaction by Beijing for every legislators or politicians that visit Taiwan from countries that do not have formal diplomatic ties with them. So I think it is a short-term victory for Taiwan, but there should be a push by Taiwan to continue doing this inter-parliamentary exchanges and eventually try to reach other sectors of Panamanian society or other parts of the different political branches in Panama to strengthen this informal relationship. While in the case of Honduras, shrimp industry relied quite a lot on Taiwan economically. And it seems that Beijing wasn't able to meet their promises in terms of importing this shrimp produce from Honduras. So there was a lot of public dissatisfaction with this diplomatic switch, even though the 2023 diplomatic switch between Honduras and Taiwan was basically uh, enforced and also pivoted by the executive branch. So right now, as we can see in the 2025 the Honduras presidential election, there is a push by both right-wing and also center candidates uh, to reestablish formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan. So it is very different, both cases of Panama and Honduras.
And you said something interesting earlier, Patrick, because you said clearly that what Panama has is the one China principle and not the one China policy, since the two are different. Most countries in the world have what we call a one China policy, which consists of saying that there is one China, and in most cases the PRC is China, but that does not necessarily mean that Taiwan is a part of it. Whereas the one China principle is what China tries to push, which is that Taiwan is a part of China. And that's only a minority of countries who follow this principle. And I just checked, and indeed you are right, Panama adopted the one China principle, and so did Honduras actually. And that's quite, how to say, that's quite extreme, going from recognizing Taiwan to adopting the one China principle, isn't it?
Right. It is very different. And I think that there's less room for to navigate in terms of informal diplomatic ties when a country recognizes the one China principle. For example, in the case of Panama, I think there was a lot of reluctancy from the president to give the green light for this trip because Panama abides to the one China principle, and also it is part of the Belt One Road initiative, even though they are not going to renew this the even though they're not going to renew uh the MOU to be a part of the One Belt and Road initiative by China. So I think uh countries that recognize the One China policy have more diplomatic engagement with Taiwan, especially when you consider informal US Taiwan ties. Uh the level of informal diplomatic exchange is to a different level.
No, I think that is important, and I think, that is the price of that diplomatic switch. That in Panama, there was the prospect of billions of dollars of investment, but the catch was you had to sign up to the One China principle. Now, I think the delegates would say this is, restricting our options as a sovereign nation, and that we should be able. I mean, the delegates will point out that Colombian and Mexican parliamentarians can come to Taiwan and it's not causing a fuss because presumably I'll have to check, but I don't think they made their diplomatic switch much earlier and presumably don't have the the one China principle. They probably have the policy, but this is why it's caused so much of a fuss in Panama.
As a matter of fact, we don't see much of a Chinese answer after this delegation. Uh, it appears that the reaction from Beijing is actually comparatively mild. Is there something we are not seeing, or something that could happen in the future as in retaliation to this move from Panama?
Yeah, I think that the big thing here is going to be, first of all, is the ports. They have not reached a decision on the ports. Xi Jinping is essentially preventing the sale uh, of the two ports in around the Panama Canal. That was meant to be, people speculated that that could be part of the wider bargain Trump would strike with Xi Jinping uh, moving forward, but it doesn't appear to have been resolved. China has options on how hardball it plays over those ports. And secondly, it probably has quite a lot of compromise on Panamanian politicians and businessmen. And there's probably they know that they can hold out a little bit. They keep their powder dry, and I don't think that they would have a lot of options against Panamanian politicians should Panama decide to either open a Taiwan office in the country, which the Minister of Foreign Affairs said they won't do, and I think it's even less likely, of course, that they would try and reestablish diplomatic ties with Panama. I think China has plenty of ammunition held in reserve on this one.
There was a very strong reaction by Beijing at the beginning when they were planning the trip, and there are multiple reports by medias in Panamanian press and also in international media such as AP that the Chinese embassy tried to urge some officials to immediately cancel or to immediately cancel the visit because it violates the One China principle. But besides that, and besides of China's condemnation of the trip after and before and after it took place, we haven't seen a strong reaction by China yet. But I think it might come. As Matt said, there is a lot of things that Beijing can leverage on Panama and also give diplomatic pressure on Panamanian companies and also use the canal as leverage. So we still have to wait and see for Beijing's response.
Patrick and Matt, thank you so much for being with us today and clarifying all this for us, and wishing you a good day.
Thanks very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Julian.
Our guests today reported they had a great experience in Alishan. The mountainous area in central Taiwan is famous for its tea production. Here is the testimony of a foreign student.
I think my best memory of Taiwan is always the people of Taiwan. So I have met so many Taiwanese that are really kind and hospitable and nice. And one of my best memory was when I went to Alishan. We were with some friends from other countries like Palau and Paraguay who have ties with Taiwan. And then there was a taxi driver who drove us all the way to the top of the mountain, but he stayed extra time with us and he showed us around. He even got us some tea. And the interesting thing is like he just wanted us to see his country. He didn't charge us extra for all the things that he did. And then after that, he took us to the center, the visitor center, and then showed us how to get the tickets and everything. Even though none of us spoke like fluent Chinese and he didn't speak English, in some way we could communicate. It's just the kindness of the people in Taiwan that makes you love the country and the whole nation.
But the reason we talked to her is because she came from Honduras, and Honduras has just gone through a presidential election.
Well, my name is Nicole, and I'm from Honduras. I came to Taiwan to study medicine, and right now I'm working as a teacher of science and health in Taiwan.
Honduras was a diplomatic ally of Taiwan until 2 years ago when it switched its recognition to Beijing. Now the next president may change course. And for those who benefited from student programs in Taiwan, that means a lot.
Well, the elections in my country there's a lot of uncertainty of what is happening right now. We don't know who the candidate will be for like the presidency and all that. But one of the hopes that we have, previous student in Taiwan, I think that one of the things that we will like is for our country to have relationships back with Taiwan. They cut the ties in 2023 as I was a student. That was my last year. I remember that it was a season for us as Hondurans and students in Taiwan. That was really hard. But now we are hoping for the best and we are hoping for things to change.
The switch towards China disappointed many people in Honduras. No surprise that the two opposition candidates together accumulated around 80% of the vote in the election. Michael Cunningham from the Center for China Studies at National Taiwan University explains.
As has happened elsewhere in Latin America in particular, the change in diplomatic recognition has not served Honduras well. A lot of promises Beijing made have not come to fruition. They have a really serious trade deficit now with China. A lot of, I don't remember the percentage, but a very high percentage of their shrimp was going to Taiwan, and their shrimp exports have just fallen off a cliff. Lots of jobs have been affected. Companies are failing to compete with the extremely cheap Chinese imports, and so it's there are many reasons, not ideological, but just many practical reasons that that many people in Honduras, I think, look back and say, well, things were better when when we had diplomatic relations with Taiwan.
Well, I was in my last year. Our scholarships were gonna be just cut down, and there was no plan of action from our government or any other support that they were going to give us. It was a situation where we had to ask out of, like, the students had to work really hard in this season to talk with the government and to ask them to make a solution, because there was like 135 Hondurans who were studying in Taiwan with the scholarship. Most of us decided to stay here and finish our degree in Taiwan, because the options that they were giving us was to go to China or nothing else, but it was like that. So we told the government that we didn't want it to, because a lot of us were gonna have to start from zero again, and we were like advancing our degrees, and some of us, the degrees that we were studying were not available also in that country. And then one of the things is that the government of our country decided to continue the support for the students that were in Taiwan, but the scholarships were canceled, so there were no more students that came. And then I remember that there was like a promise that they said that China would have make the same scholarships, but I think it never happened until like last year, this year 2025, they started doing that. But during the year of 2023 and 2024, it was not like that. So there were no students that applied new students. The students that stay in Taiwan, they had to struggle a lot because our government in Honduras, they said that they would provide the money for them to finish their study, but the money that was supposed to be sent monthly, it was sometimes a lot of the times it was delayed. So a lot of students had to start working while they were studying, and at the same time, some even experienced like they almost got kicked out of their houses or of the schools because of the financial situation that they had.
The counting of votes in Honduras still shows a very close call between Nasri Asfura of the National Party and Salvador Nasralla of the Liberal Party. But both of them have expressed pro-Taiwan views. Both of them could switch recognition back to Taipei.
Well, this will be the question. So if a pro-Taiwan candidate is elected, we'll just have to see, if one of the opposition parties takes back the presidency um, in Honduras, then I think there will be a chance for them to switch back recognition to Taiwan. But it won't necessarily happen. And I think if it doesn't happen, this time, if the opposition regains power, then it might not happen ever. And so I think it will be a critical time. It is an opportunity for change. I know that. So we'll see if that happens. If it does, and it probably wouldn't happen immediately, but if months or a couple years down the road, a switch in recognition does happen, that will be objectively really good for Taiwan. It's not something every country can do. The U.S. cannot switch recognition back to Taiwan without taking a very high risk of causing a war over the Taiwan Strait that would come very close to crossing Beijing's actual red line. But a country like Honduras, which is much less influential than the United States, can do this, and smaller countries have switched recognition back and forth between Beijing and Taipei in the past, although it's been quite some time. So that will be very interesting if we see it. It will be very, very good for Taipei if it happens. Well, this is a really important question because I know a lot of people in Taiwan sort of downplay the importance of their diplomatic partners. There's this sense that it's mostly small countries with very limited influence on the global stage, that the actual concrete interests that Taiwan gets are mostly from countries like Japan and the US. And so there's a tendency a lot of people have to just sort of conclude that formal diplomatic ties are not really that important. And that is certainly not the case. The fact that there still are a handful of countries, little more than a handful of countries that recognize the Republic of China, recognize Taiwan instead of Beijing, that really, that it does give Taiwan a degree of legal legitimacy on the international stage. So when Beijing says that the whole world recognizes that Taiwan is part of the PRC, when they say this, it's objectively not true when they say this. And that is because Taiwan still has several diplomatic allies or diplomatic partners internationally. Now, I am happy to say that in my conversations with people in Taipei, it's pretty clear, in my conversations with people in the foreign ministry in Taiwan in particular, it's very clear that the Lai administration's foreign ministry really does take diplomatic partners seriously.
Such a move would change the life of Hondurans in Taiwan, but it would also trigger a response from China.
How Beijing would respond to a change in recognition. I think their response, they would want to punish Honduras economically, but I think there's a limited amount of pain they can inflict on Honduras compared to some of the countries that are better integrated with China. It's a very lopsided economic relationship right now. And sure, I'm sure there would be significant economic pain involved, but they may they may see it as in the long term it will be better for them. Now, I think Beijing will also really turn on the charm, and I think we're seeing that they're really turning on the charm offensive and really trying to start to get some of their past promises past the finish line to prevent a change in recognition. But at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world for Beijing if if a if some of these countries every now and then if a country switches recognition back to Taiwan, it is sort of a slap in the face. But at the end of the day, having a handful of countries recognize Taiwan is not the worst thing that can happen for Beijing. At the very least, it gives Beijing a tool it can use as it tries to, if all countries severed their recognition of Taiwan, Beijing would not have this weapon in its arsenal of a non-military response it can use to express displeasure with Taipei. It is a very strong response when it manages to peel a diplomatic partner away from Taiwan. And that's a response that doesn't involve mobilizing the military, risking creating, accidentally escalating to the point of warfare. And so it's not the end of the world for Beijing to have some countries that continue to recognize Taipei.
Well, one of the things that I hope, first of all, is I would like to have my country to have a good president who thinks for the country's benefit, but specifically for the people. I think that one of the things that happened when Honduras got ties with Taiwan is that the government was not thinking about the people, about what the people wanted, and the benefits that it brings not only to us, but also politically to having relationships with Taiwan. Not only about Taiwan, but about my country. I wish that the president that wins right now, because right now it's a technical tie, so we don't know who's going to be the president. I wish that person can see a way to go through the presidency, but thinking about his people, the benefit that all the ties and the political situations will give to the Hondurans, to the economy, and to their education in the future.
A few other news relevant to Taiwan include: Taiwan has banned the Chinese app Xiaohongshu for 1 year, saying the Chinese social platform is tied to large-scale fraud and has failed to meet local requirements, such as setting up a local entity. There are also concerns about its use for cognitive warfare. US President Donald Trump unveiled an updated national security strategy that explicitly highlights Taiwan and the South China Sea. The document stresses military deterrence and stronger allied forces to prevent a conflict with China. Taiwan and Japan both raised concern after reports that China deployed over 100 naval and Coast Guard vessels from the Yellow Sea through waters near the Senkaku Islands. We will meet again next weekend to discuss more news about Taiwan and the world. Wishing you a pleasant week.